Welcome to today's Explainer. I am so glad you're here because today we are tackling something that literally affects every single one of us. We're going to decipher a really fascinating text that shows us how to instantly transform our family dynamics. Okay, let's jump right in. The source material we're looking at today presents this profound, almost mind-bending concept that your family is essentially a mirror reflecting your own inner self. By the end of this explainer, you are going to have a completely new framework for understanding the people closest to you.
But first, let's start with a really universal question. Why are family problems so incredibly hard to solve? I mean, it's a frustrating truth, right? The people we share our lives with, they're often the hardest ones to deal with. We can be perfectly polite and patient with some total stranger at the grocery store, but the second we walk through our own front door, bam, friction sparks. Today's text asks us to look at exactly why that happens, and more importantly, how we can actually break the cycle. And, well, that brings us straight to the author's core thesis. The shortest path to having others treat you kindly is to first become a kinder person yourself. Now, notice how this completely flips our usual script. Usually, when we have a conflict with a spouse or a parent, our gut instinct is to try and force them to change. But the text argues that's basically impossible. The absolute only variable you actually control in your household is you.
To really get this, we need to define the central metaphor of this explainer, the mirror rule. The text defines this as the psychological and spiritual principle that your family simply reflects your own inner state. Think about it. Human beings react to what they're given. If you come at someone with thorns, well, their own thorns are going to come right out. So when you're interacting with a difficult family member, they're really just a mirror, bouncing your own energy, your own expectations, and your own attitudes right back at you. All right, let's dive into our first application of this, the spousal reflection. Look at this transformation here. On one side, we have idealistic newlyweds. You know, when a couple first gets together, they've got high hopes, they speak to each other kindly, they see the absolute best in each other. But as the years, maybe 10, 20 years roll by, we often see this slow shift into tired, complaining spouses. The text describes this all too common scenario where the once gentle partner is just exhausted from work, or that sweet newlywed turns into someone constantly airing grievances. The daily grind has literally tarnished that original shiny mirror. Which leads us to a pretty tough but honestly empowering realization. If your partner looks worse than before, you share the responsibility for that change. Wow. So the key takeaway here is self-accountability. The source firmly reminds us that spouses are constantly educating and influencing each other every single day. If you look at your partner right now and think they look miserable or tired or bitter compared to when you first met, well, you kind of helped co-create that environment. You share the responsibility for their current state. But hey, don't worry, the text definitely doesn't just leave us hanging there. It gives us clear, actionable steps to polish that mirror and fix the reflection. Step 1, reflect on your initial vows. Remember why you actually fell in love with them in the first place. Step 2 is absolutely critical. Stop finding faults. The author actually notes that criticizing someone is often just a disguised way of bragging about your own abilities. Crazy, right? And step 3 is to elevate each other. Couples have to proactively find each other's good qualities. When you start projecting appreciation, your spouse's mirror is eventually going to reflect that exact appreciation right back at you. Moving right along, let's look at parent-child soul wavelengths. The text introduces this wildly fascinating concept called soul affinity. This is the principle that a child's soul doesn't just, randomly drop into a family. Instead, it typically chooses and is born to parents who share a similar spiritual wavelength or frequency. The author states that for over 80% of people, a soul literally cannot be born to parents unless there's this underlying affinity. So our kids aren't just biologically similar to us, they are spiritually resonant with us. They reflect our deepest and sometimes completely hidden spiritual tendencies. Notice how this timeline maps out the distortion. The text points out that unhealed emotional wounds from childhood, say a lack of affection from a mother or deep frustration from never getting a father's approval, they don't just magically disappear. Actually, they manifest years later in totally different forms. A person might spend their early adulthood desperately seeking validation from their bosses at work. And in later adulthood, this can lead to repeated setbacks in marriages, where they subconsciously seek out partners who replicate that exact original childhood wound. The mirror just keeps reflecting the unresolved pain over and over until we finally fix it.
Okay, so we've looked at spouses and we've explored parents and children. But what happens when the family mirror is reflecting pure, unfiltered conflict? Specifically, what happens when we look at the notoriously difficult dynamic between, say, a mother in law and a daughter in law? The source tackles this head on with a total paradigm shifting concept: in law conflict as training. Instead of seeing friction with in laws as this endless toxic drama that you just have to grit your teeth and endure, which, let's be honest, is how most of us naturally view it, the text urges us to reframe it. View it as purposeful, spiritual training. Think of it like this: the mother in law often criticizes or points out flaws simply because she has vastly more life experience. And sure, being on the receiving end of that might feel exactly like being a new employee getting scolded by the boss. But taking this gracefully, that is presented as excellent spiritual training, perfectly designed for your own growth in the real world. To not just survive, but actually thrive in the spiritual training, the text offers this golden rule. If you associate with their strengths, there are no bad people. So the crucial point is this: your mother-in-law, your father-in-law, whoever is causing the friction, they have positive traits, for sure. By focusing entirely on what you can learn from them and actively acknowledging those strengths, the conflict literally diffuses. The mirror stops reflecting hostility and starts reflecting mutual respect. As we bring this explainer to a close, we hit our final core concept: be kinder first. So, how do we actually put all this into practice? First, acknowledge your reflection. Look at your family and realize they're showing you a piece of yourself. Second, stop blaming others. Remember, you cannot force their minds to change, but you have 100% control over your own mind. Third, actively change your projection. If you want a harmonious house, you've got to emit harmony. And finally, lead with kindness. Changing your own mindset is absolutely the shortest path to solving household friction. Which leaves us with this final vital thought to chew on. If your family is indeed a mirror, what are you going to choose to reflect today? The people around you are just waiting to bounce your energy right back at you. You have the power to instantly change the dynamic in your home just by changing yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope you take these insights and use them to see a brilliant new reflection in your own life.
Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're taking a look at some seriously practical and honestly kind of unconventional advice on marriage. We're exploring a source that's all about quick and refreshing lessons for everyday marital happiness. Now, instead of giving us vague, high-level theories, this material gets right down in the weeds. It breaks down common household tensions into totally actionable, everyday countermeasures. So let's see exactly how the author suggests we completely reframe our domestic lives.
Here's how we're going to break it down today. We've got 5 main concepts to cover: the trap of criticism, the power of listening, the cute wife strategy, starting a family religion, and finally, guarding your words. Let's get right to it.
First up, Section 1, the trap of criticism. The author establishes a pretty universal baseline right out of the gate here. Relationships stumble. It happens to literally all of us. But when things get rocky, our immediate, almost reflexive instinct is usually to just point the finger and criticize our partner, right?
Well, the author points out a fascinating core issue with that. Check out this quote: "Criticizing others is often just a hidden boast of your own abilities." Think about that for a second. When we think we're just airing a perfectly valid complaint, the text actually frames this as a cleverly disguised way of asserting our own superiority. We're basically saying, hey, I'm better than you at this, which, as you can imagine, instantly throws up a roadblock in the relationship.
So the crucial point is, how do we pivot away from that destructive instinct? The source prescribes a very specific internal shift. Instead of finding faults in your partner, it suggests you should start praising them in your heart. And notice, you don't necessarily have to say it out loud at first. The idea is that by simply stopping the constant search for flaws and shifting to silent internal praise, the other person will mysteriously begin to reflect on their own behavior. It's like flipping a switch in the dynamic.
Moving on to Section 2, the power of listening. This is presented as an incredibly potent tool, and the best part is, it requires absolutely no grand gestures. It's just a fundamental shift in how we actually receive our partner's words.
The author lays out a super clear cause and effect progression here. It all starts with simply listening actively to your partner's story, just giving them the floor. By truly hearing their side, you gain genuine understanding. And in this text's view, feeling understood is practically synonymous with feeling loved. In fact, the source claims that just sitting there and listening for a few hours without even trying to fix a single thing acts as this massive catalyst that automatically neutralizes a whole bunch of underlying domestic tensions.
But hey, what happens when passive listening just isn't cutting it? The text tackles a really specific scenario next. How should a wife handle a husband's apparent lack of affection? This question is our pivot point into the author's more traditional perspective on household roles and marital dynamics.
Which brings us to Section 3, the cute wife strategy. Here, the source material offers highly specific, actionable advice tailored for wives who might be feeling neglected. And as you'll see, it focuses really heavily on external presentation, attitude, and the overall vibe of the home.
The author draws a really sharp contrast here. Now, the common, perfectly understandable reaction is to lament the lack of affection, or, express frustration when a husband comes home exhausted to a messy house. But instead of that, the text suggests reviewing one's own appearance and actively considering how to be cute or endearing for him. Basically, rather than complaining, the wife is encouraged to keep things cheerful, keep the house tidy, and consciously act affectionately. The logic being that this welcoming atmosphere will naturally encourage her husband's love to return.
Now let's jump into Section 4, starting a family religion. I know, it sounds a bit intense, but this builds into one of the absolute most striking and unconventional concepts in the entire text. It deals directly with how a wife is advised to internally view a husband who has real, undeniable flaws.
To set this up, the author introduces this concept called the computer diagnosis. It's a great metaphor. It describes that really common, destructive habit we have of coldly and logically analyzing our spouse's shortcomings. It's when a wife mentally runs the data. His salary is below average, he's falling behind his peers, maybe he's got physical flaws, or he's just unreliable. The text warns that as long as a household is running on this rigid, hyper-logical computer diagnosis, real love literally cannot develop. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the proposed antidote to that cold analysis. The text introduces the term family religion, and it is a deliberate, conscious practice. It's where a wife entirely unplugs the computer. She stops analyzing his factual flaws. Instead, regardless of the objective, real-world facts, she chooses to revere him in her mind as a wonderful existence. The text even goes as far as calling him the presiding deity of the household. It is a total, 100% suspension of criticism in favor of absolute internal reverence.
So you've got this massive contrast between the cold logic of the computer diagnosis on one side and the blind faith of the family religion on the other. And the author makes a truly bold claim here. They argue that making this profound internal shift from analysis to faith, even if it's a secret held entirely in your own mind, will actually cause a seemingly unreliable husband to transform into a genuinely admirable person.
All right, moving into our final section, guarding your words. We've talked a ton about deep internal shifts, but the source transitions here to a super practical, in-the-moment tactic for when a fiery conflict is actively brewing and you've got an insult right on the tip of your tongue. The text sets the stakes incredibly high for verbal arguments by treating the mouth as a literal gateway. The author views harsh, condemning words not just as sounds, but as living, breathing things. Once those dark, negative words escape the gateway of your mouth, they take on a life of their own. They get inside your partner's mind, they spark hatred, and they inevitably trigger a full-blown war of retaliation. Because of that, the absolute #1 priority in any domestic dispute is making sure that gate stays firmly locked. Let's move to and see how this builds into an exact, prescribed sequence to neutralize that anger. Step 1, you have to actually recognize and feel those harsh words about to burst out. Step 2, immediately take a deep breath. Step 3, start counting numbers in your head, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10. And step 4, successfully guard that gateway to prevent those bad words from escaping. The promise here is that by the time you hit 10, that burning urge to drop a destructive phrase will have passed.
Which brings us to a final thought to leave you with today. Are our daily marital frustrations truly about our partner's objective flaws? Or are they in fact reflections of our own unguarded reactions and internal mindsets? Throughout all the lessons we've looked at today, from replacing criticism with internal praise, to the cute wife strategy, to starting a family religion, the source material repeatedly hammers home one core idea. Changing your partner begins entirely with changing your own internal state. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structured look at these marital countermeasures gives you something fascinating to ponder in your own daily life.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this one, because we are looking at a really fascinating and highly specific text today.
We're breaking down Chapter 3 from Ryuho Okawa's book, Tea Time, and this specific chapter is titled, This is the Wisdom to Prevent Falling. Now, what's so interesting about this source material is that it absolutely doesn't just offer you vague, feel-good advice. No, it provides a highly structured and traditional framework for managing your domestic life. So let's get into it. You see, the author operates on this core premise that family harmony doesn't just magically happen by accident. And on the flip side, misfortune isn't just a streak of bad luck. Instead, Okawa argues that very specific, structured strategies, what he literally defines as the wisdom to prevent falling, are absolutely required to keep crises at bay. It's presented to the reader almost like a set of natural laws. The idea is that if you ignore these laws, it's basically going to lead to inevitable domestic collapse. To make sense of all this wide-ranging advice, we've organized the playbook into 3 expanding spheres of a person's life. First, the intergenerational sphere. Second, the marital sphere. And finally, the personal and household sphere. Let's start right off with the first section, the intergenerational sphere, focusing on navigating parent-child traps. Now, this brilliantly illustrates one of the text's boldest claims about family dynamics. You know, we usually brush off domestic rebellion as just a phase kids go through, right? Well, Okawa actually traces a huge amount of children's rebellion and even domestic violence directly back to the parents. He argues that when parents operate under a guise of love, basically forcing their own specific values or rigid career paths onto their kids, it creates massive psychological stress. It's like a pressure cooker. The child's reaction isn't just mild annoyance. According to the text, this intense forced pressure is a primary trigger for severe rebellion and literal physical violence within the home. And this dynamic doesn't just magically stop when childhood ends, it bleeds right into adult life. The author uses a really vivid metaphor for this. He calls it the birdcage of Lot. The text claims that parents frequently and subconsciously bind their adult children. The parents might actually think they're providing this selfless, giving love, but the book argues they're actually treating their kids like playthings to be controlled. The big takeaway here is a highly specific example Okawa gives. He argues that a daughter's inability to marry is often caused by her own parents. Even if they verbally nag her to get married, subconsciously they're actually binding her to them. They're keeping her trapped in this invisible birdcage out of a selfish desire to just not let her go.
Moving right along to our second category, the marital sphere, where we look at how the text tells couples to navigate disparity and late life risks.
Okay, so the source material lays down some incredibly strict, almost absolute laws regarding gender dynamics. For instance, it states there is an outright law where if a wife's income or her social status exceeds her husband's, the husband's self-esteem gets deeply wounded. And according to Okawa, this blow to his pride doesn't just cause a few arguments. It inevitably leads to the husband seeking comfort elsewhere. It results in infidelity or a complete family breakdown. The book asserts that, fundamentally, men are entirely driven by their self-esteem within the household. So what exactly is the author's solution to this marital danger zone? Well, he puts the responsibility squarely on the spouse. The text proposes that a wise wife must skillfully step in and protect her husband's pride. Even if she's vastly more successful, or even if the husband is totally failing in certain areas, she has to ensure his ego is never entirely dismantled. She has to leave, as the quote specifically says, at least one layer intact. The framework here is super traditional. It essentially positions the ongoing management of the male ego as a core daily duty of the wife, just to keep the family unit from collapsing.
Now, this dynamic shifts a little bit as the couple ages, which brings us to preventing the late life crisis, specifically late life divorce. The text warns of a very specific phenomenon that happens when husbands retire. To prevent a massive crisis, the couple absolutely has to develop shared hobbies and strategically design a real purpose for their old age. But take a look at the third step in this prevention plan. This is an exact and honestly pretty harsh translation directly from the book. Okawa warns that a husband who only ever worked and has zero home skills or hobbies is going to become oversized trash around the house after he retires, causing immense stress to the wife. Strategic planning is presented as literally the only way to avoid the specific fate. All right, let's step into our third and final section, the personal and household sphere, looking at mind, body, and money. Kawa makes a really bold spiritual and physiological claim here. The text states directly that holding on to hatred doesn't just ruin your mood for the day, it literally, physically destroys your cells. He argues that the destructive, negative energy of hatred can materialize within your actual body and cause severe physical illnesses. He explicitly points to diseases like cancer as a potential direct result of harboring deep resentments against other people. Which naturally leads us to this question. How in the world do you let go of it?
The text solution is absolute forgiveness. But pay attention to the framing here. It's actually not about the other person deserving your forgiveness at all. Okawa pitches forgiveness as an essential preventative health measure for your own sake. You have to forgive the people who have insulted or harmed you, not because they're right, but purely to stop your own selves from being destroyed by that toxic spiritual energy.
And finally, the text pivots from physical health to financial health during a crisis. When a household hits a severe financial pinch, Okawa demands that the reader personally step up and become a ruthless cost cutter. And these financial strategies? They are aggressive. He says to abandon all vanity immediately, stop paying high tuition costs, sell the fancy foreign cars. And my absolute personal favorite detail from the book, it actually advises you to use fake excuses just to cut out unnecessary socializing, like making up a fake bad back so you don't have to shell out cash for an expensive golf outing with your coworkers. The message is incredibly clear. Survival requires dropping all of your appearances. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. We've looked at everything today, right? From the birdcage of toxic parenting to actively managing the male ego and even using forgiveness as a literal health strategy. So here is the big question I want to leave you with today. How do these highly traditional, very rigid, and deeply spiritually driven frameworks hold up against the rapidly, constantly evolving family dynamics of today's society? It's a really fascinating look at one specific worldview on maintaining domestic order. Think about it, take these insights, reflect on them, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a deep, high-energy dive into a truly fascinating concept. We're looking at this idea that our totally private lives actually dictate our public success. We'll be exploring how the fundamental power of the family unit is, well, kind of the root source of our happiness, and how that energy ripples out way beyond our front doors.
So let me ask you this. Could the secret to your career success actually be hiding right there in your living room? I know, it sounds totally counterintuitive. We're always taught to strictly separate work and home, right? Keep your personal life personal. But the source material argues that worldly success and even broader social harmony actually start right at home.
All right, let's jump into section 1, family as a microcosm. So a microcosm. Basically, the family acts as this miniature model of society. I mean, think about it. A child spends roughly their first 18 to 20 years in this very specific, enclosed environment. It's not just a place to sleep and eat, it is literally an inescapable blueprint for the real world. This is exactly where we learn the absolute foundations of how to exist alongside other human beings.
Inside that domestic training ground, we pick up 3 really fundamental things. First up, we learn basic gender roles and dynamics just by observing our parents day in and day out. Second, we learn the hierarchy of age, how to respect and interact with people older than us, and that directly translates to how we handle seniority later on in the workplace. And third, we learn how to take responsibility for those younger than us. If you have a younger sibling, you learn how to look out for them. It's actually the exact same dynamic as a manager mentoring a junior employee later in life.
Moving right along to section 2, parents as role models.
Okay, this next point is absolutely crucial. The source argues that the absolute most important thing for a child's growth is witnessing their parents loving and respecting each other. Honestly, forget the expensive tutoring or the perfectly curated extracurricular activities. Just seeing parental harmony in action is the ultimate gift you can give a kid.
And here is exactly how this generational transfer works. Step 1. Parents show mutual respect in their regular, mundane, everyday interactions. Step 2. Children, who are basically sponges watching everything, internalize this ideal. They learn what a healthy relationship looks like simply by living inside one. And then step 3, fast forward a few decades, and those same children replicate this harmony in their own adult lives. So witnessed domestic harmony translates directly into future societal stability.
Which brings us to section 3, home life affects work. This is where it gets really interesting. Hidden domestic struggles directly sabotage our professional skills. The text draws this stark contrast. On one hand, you have private life troubles. Think marital fights or ongoing unresolved arguments. On the other hand, you have workplace failures. If someone struggles with, say, poor negotiation skills or a lack of confidence at the office, it often stems directly from a lack of confidence or harmony in their private life. You just can't be a charismatic, confident negotiator at work if you're constantly feeling defeated the minute you walk through your front door.
So the takeaway here is simple though. Yeah, definitely challenging. You need to resolve family issues as a top priority if you really want to excel in your career. The advice is to dedicate your weekends and evenings to solving home issues first. A peaceful private life
isn't just some nice-to-have bonus. It's literally the absolute foundation of a successful public life.
Let's zoom out a bit for Section 4, lighting up the world.
There's this beautiful, really profound quote from the source that says, "The light illuminated in a trusting and harmonious family will eventually become the power to save the world." Wow. Think about that for a second. A harmonious home acts as this sort of castle of light, a utopian starting point that has the power to emanate outwards.
And you can easily trace this ripple effect. Step 1, harmony starts localized, right there in the living room. Step 2, that light and stability naturally spread. It spills over to your neighbors, your friends, your wider community. And finally, step 3, as all these interconnected nodes of light join together, an ideal society is created. It just goes to show the massive macro impact of our micro behaviors.
And finally, Section 5, Life as Fleeting Memory.
The text leaves us with this gentle metaphor. Life on Earth is but a fleeting memory, like a school trip. It encourages us to just pause, doesn't it? We get so caught up in the daily grind, but in the grand scheme of things, our time here on Earth is incredibly brief. It's just a short, passing journey of learning and experiencing.
Imagine for a minute taking a cosmic perspective, just pulling back, ascending way up into the sky. From up there, the Earth looks incredibly small, doesn't it? All those harsh daily struggles, the bitter arguments, the worldly anxieties, they simply fade away. And what are we left with? The ultimate realization of wishing we had been kinder. When we look back on this fleeting life, our anxieties give way to a profound desire for gentleness.
Which naturally brings us right back to the golden rule. Always strive to treat others as kindly as you would wish to be treated. Rather than grinding through a harsh, super competitive existence that just breeds stress, choosing gentleness ensures you leave behind a legacy of real warmth.
So, since life really is that brief, what kind of gentle and warm memories are you going to leave behind? It's definitely something to chew on. Prioritize kindness and harmony in your own living room, knowing it literally holds the power to shape the entire world. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.